This is Editing Ellie jumping in to let you know that we had a bit of trouble with the audio for this episode. Specifically, a lot of what Sophie said comes through somewhat low volume and muffled. I've done my best to fix it, but it's not ideal, so just bear with us this episode before it's sorted in the next. Enjoy.
Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously, without instruction.
See what the Empire has done to your lives, your families, and your freedom?
Good people will fight if we lead them.
The rebellion is spreading.
Now we take the war to them.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Systems either change or die.
Into the first.
You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission.
And wake up. There is one way. And be fighting from the start.
Long live the Empire!
Fight the Empire!
Let's call it war.
Remember this. Try.
Hey, Sophie.
Uh-huh.
How does a non-binary Jedi defeat their enemy?
No clue.
They slash them.
Oh my god.
Welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, a Star Wars podcast about history, politics, and queer stuff. I'm Eleanor Mueller.
I am Sophia Dunstan.
Sophie, what do you know about droids in Star Wars?
They're funny.
They are funny.
They're always the comedic relief droids. Like, something bad happens and R2-D2 is just like, "Reew!" And everyone's like, haha, Star Wars funny. I also know that occasionally they're slaves.
More than occasionally are they slaves, Sophie. kind of jumping to the end there, but yeah. Droids in Star Wars are mechanical beings that are designed for, function and work, right? Varying degrees of intelligence. Some droids are bipedal, some droids have arms and legs like humanoids. Some droids have wheels, or they hover, because it's Star Wars.
Star Wars does just love to make something hover unnecessarily.
Sometimes stuff hovering is how you know it's Star Wars.
You're right, I'm sorry. Luke's land speeder really wouldn't have worked super well if it just had wheels.
Luke's land speeder did have wheels, actually. The prop was just a car with mirrors between the land speeder itself and the ground.
I don't like that.
It's cool.
That's very smart, but I don't like it.
It's a good look. It's you can kind of tell if you look closely at some of the shots. Droids are often built in bulk, right? They are made by companies and they're set to tasks with one-time programming. You don't have to train them. You just send them on their way.
So they're artificial. They have what we would love to call, buzzword time, deep learning capabilities.
I think that's a little bit too...
primitive?
No, I don't think that we can reliably draw a connection between real-world artificial intelligence and what droids are in Star Wars. I am not a computer scientist. I'm not a person who works on artificial intelligence. However, I do not think that the ways in which any deep learning AI, any kind of large language model, any of that works is itself analogous to droids. A droid's status as a droid does not really seem to relate to its own intelligence. Droids vary wildly in intelligence. You have your little mouse droid and he's just scooting around. And then you have someone like C-3PO that is a dude.
C-3PO is more than a dude.
C-3PO's the dude.
The amount of intelligence in C-3PO is greater than a dude, so I would say he is more like a...
C-3PO is more like a god. Daughters of Ferrix, the first Ewok podcast.
I was actually going to make that joke, so I'm a little mad.
I'm really sorry. I'll include this so you get the credit. Droids are largely seen as an alternative to organic labor. Droids need different sorts of upkeep. They don't die in the vacuum of space. You don't have to feed them. You don't have to clothe them or let them sleep. There are places in the galaxy where a droid is seen as a luxury in regard to organic labor. There are also places where a droid is the go-to because they can't afford organic labor, right? Paying a person is less advantageous than owning a droid, which might be itself less advantageous than, an organic slave. This is not consistent in Star Wars. It depends on the setting. It depends on the location. Droids are often affixed with restraining bolts. Those are devices which limit their cognitive and physical functions. Restraining bolts can force a droid to respond to simple commands from a little, remote thing.
Call me a droid the way that you can force me to respond to simple commands.
Call you a droid and that you'll call anyone master.
Excuse me, the Kinsey test said I have incidental heterosexual tendencies, okay?
Sophia, incidental heterosexual tendencies, Dunstan. Above all else, a restraining bolt removes their ability to function normally in the world. Different droids are programmed for different tasks. Droid classes are groupings based on application technology and skills. Class 1 is like analytical medical sciences. That's torture droids, that's midwife droids, that's medical droids.
So a torture droid is a medical science droid.
It's got to know how to get it out of you.
I like that a lot, actually.
She tortures on my droid till I get it out of you. Class 2 is engineering and technical sciences. That's astromech droids, that's pit droids, because they do repairs. Treadwell droids, PLNK power droids. Interestingly, GNK power droids are class 5, but PLNK are class 3. This is interesting, I swear.
This is about as interesting to the average person as me talking about various types of trains is to you, so...
So you know gonk droids?
Uh-huh.
A plunk droid is just a long gonk droid.
So it's like, instead of having 2 legs, it has 4, so it's like a really fat droid dog.
I believe you are correct, yes. Plunk droids tend to be filled with Tabana gas instead of their batteries. Usually plunk droids show up in video games as a thing that you shoot and they explode to kill enemies around them, so...
Cruel.
That's what happens to one in the Book of Boba Fett.
Oh my god.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Anyway. Class 3 is interaction with organic beings, diplomacy, childcare. That's the LEP service droid. That's
C-3PO.
luxury attendant droids. That's C-3PO, human-cyborg relations. That's all protocol droids. Class 4 droids are security and military droids. Police droids, that's KX security droids like K2SO. Assassin droids like the IG series, and all battle droids. Class 5 is menial tasks, quote-unquote non-intelligent jobs. That's gonk droids. Mouse droids, PK worker droids, cleaning droids, sifting droids, all that shit. All of the other ones. The little droids that, like, fly up above the lava on Mustafar that Anakin and Obi-Wan stand on, those are probably class 5. So a question that's not really clear is what's the difference between, like, a droid and a computer module in a mining facility? Your droid can interface with the computer module, but is the module itself intelligent? What delineates a mechanical or, like, hydraulic lift from staircase droid from Andor? I've included a picture in the notes if you want to look at staircase droid.
Staircase droid from Andor.
So when Luthen is on his way to Ferrix in episode 3, I believe.
That's a droid?
Yes, it is.
I was assuming it was just like your airport staircase.
It moves and it extends.
And therefore is a droid.
It moves autonomously. It's a common belief among galactic citizens.
He has no mouth and he must staircase.
It's a common belief among galactic citizens that some droids like Protocol are afforded an extra degree of sentience, whatever that means. I mean, why? Why do you need to be conscious, supposedly, as C-3PO to do your job better, right?
Because you're a protocol droid, and you need to be able to adapt responsively.
What about staircase droid? Does staircase droid adapt responsibly?
Not need to adapt responsibly. So staircase droid can follow a line on the ground, and it will tell him where to park.
But he doesn't get lines on the ground. He just has to figure it out.
That's because Star Wars is a primitive society that does not understand how airports work.
Droids fill all sorts of roles, servant roles as basically pets. They're assistants, but they are workers, right? Why would a gonk droid be endowed with personality and memory? And is like R2-D2 less sentient than C-3PO?
R2-D2 is not less sentient than C-3PO. He just speaks a different language than C-3PO.
For all we know, he's less sentient. People who don't speak English are less sentient. This is the part where I talk about philosophy. Are you so excited?
I love philosophy.
Are you so excited that this politics podcast has turned into Eleanor talks about philosophy for like 3 pages? In Western philosophy, a major school of thought is mind-body dualism. That's a philosophy within the philosophy of mind, the idea that the mental for human beings is non-physical and distinct from the human body. The mind-body problem in philosophy is the question that asks the relationship between the body, the flesh, the matter, the touchy bits, and the mind, the abstract, the experimental, the emotional, the subjective.
So I have a question about the mind-body problem. Is that anything like the trolley problem, where if you pull one lever, it kills the mind, and if you pull another lever, it kills the body?
That's exactly what the mind-body problem is. I elect every time to kill the mind. Substance dualism, as defended by guy who can't pull off bangs Rene Descartes,
my boy,
denotes the mental, the stuff happening in your brain, right, as transcending the body. The body can't think, but the mind exists beyond that. Natalie Wynn, in a reference that I can't put in the sources because it's a Patreon exclusive, refers to this type of mind-body dualism as having like a deeply traditional Christian influence, the idea that a singular God created mankind with immortal sentient souls that themselves transcend a physical world, right?
Gang.
This is often set in opposition to non-human animals, themselves supposedly not created in God's image, as being purely mechanistic. Descartes believed that only humans have the dualistic non-physical mind. He held that non-human animals were essentially mindless automata, slave to their passions and instincts. Call me a mindless automata the way I'm slave to my passions and instincts.
So true. You should really overcome that.
So this is one type of mind-body dualism from one specific dead man. Dualism itself has lots of different branches of thought. Certainly I'm not saying that most philosophical dualists view non-human animals as machines. Most philosophers alive today do not believe or argue that animals are insentient automata.
You see, and I'm of the opposite opinion. It's now my thought that humans are insentient automata and animals are sentient, humans are non-sentient automata. That's where NPC comes from.
NPC, non-sentient
Person
computer.
Correct.
I got it. I got there in the end. Set in opposition to dualism is mind-body monism. Monism holds that the mind and the body are the same process working in tandem. One is indiscernible from the other. It's the same system, it's the same stuff. This is really common these days. Physicalist monism is the idea that only the physical exists and that all psychological processes are or will be explicable via material forces.
Psychiatry.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of modern scientific thought has both a physicalist view and a monistic view. That's monistic, separate from monastic. Other types of monism date back much longer than physicalism. Many Eastern traditions tend to posit some varying type of ontological monism, that the universe is like one entity, that it's artificially divided into many from our perspective. In Buddhism, sentience is the quality of having senses, which of course includes like non-human animals within sentience. The Bodhisattva Four Extensive Vows sometimes include a line which is translated as saying that sentient beings are limitless in number. Jainism denotes different degrees, as it were, of jiva, sometimes translated as like soul or sentience. The ranking is based on the number of senses that a thing has. For example, 2 sensed beings have like touch and taste, supposedly worms. I'm pretty sure that worms can also smell, but it's not my religion.
So then is God like 6 sensed being?
I believe that we are six-sensed beings.
Smell, hear, sight.
There's a 6th one, which is consciousness. The 6th sense in Jainism is the sense of oneself.
Mm.
Different schools of thought in the philosophy of mind vary wildly on what allows, determines, delineates, characterizes any permutation of any idea of consciousness, intelligence, thought, sapience, etc. Several or none of those words can be treated as philosophically synonymous with one another depending on who you're talking to. Funnily enough, it's hella fucking difficult to define this shit, and everyone who takes a crack at it does it pretty differently. Forced feminization icon Alan Turing.
No! That is not a nice way to introduce Alan Turing, Eleanor.
Forced feminization icon Alan Turing.
No, that is so bad.
Alan Turing.
Thank you.
Forced feminization icon.
Damn it.
When faced with the question, can machines think, wanted to change the question to one that he saw as having more definite terms, right? This is much more philosophically solvent. Can machines do what humans as thinking entities do? The now world-famous Turing test is proposed as a method to answer that question. 2 test subjects, a human and a machine, are asked a series of questions by an interrogator, separated from physical contact so the answers given are the only variable. The answers the subjects give are themselves evaluated by whether or not a human would give them. It is the goal of the interrogator to determine which test subject is the machine. The more consistently the interrogator is unable to tell which answers are given by the machine, the more that machine passes the Turing test. Unsurprisingly...
Bechdel test, but for machines.
Yeah, sure.
You have to have 2 or more machines talking together in the first 10 minutes of the movie about something other than humans, otherwise it does not pass the Turing test.
That's exactly what it is, thank you. Unsurprisingly, from a 21st century perspective, lots of machines pass the Turing test fairly regularly and have for decades. We live in a world with like large language models that generate text and speech based on training data that could easily fool a lot of people. So by this premise, machines can do what thinking entities do. However, there are lots of issues to be taken with the Turing test's premise, including another very famous thought experiment devised by 91-year-old sex pest John Searle. John Searle, still alive.
And still a sex pest?
I assume. I don't know. Searle proposed that the Turing test doesn't find if a machine can think. It finds if a machine can trick you. Suppose there's a room with a locked door. Under the door, you can pass pieces of paper with questions written in Chinese, and in return, you'll receive answers written in Chinese. So there's someone in this room who reads and writes Chinese, yeah?
Correct. His name is John, and he lives there.
He learned Mandarin Chinese in his second year of college.
He's Schrodinger's Chinese speaker.
It's not until you open the door to the locked room that you know if John is alive or dead.
Correct.
There is not someone in the room who can speak Chinese. Inside the room, there's an English-speaking woman.
Jane.
Congrats on her transition. She has loads of filing cabinets with all the Chinese characters she'll need, and she has an English language manual with extreme precision that tells her, when you get this sequence of symbols, you return this other sequence of symbols, or this character for this character, etc., etc., etc. By Searle's reckoning, you wouldn't say that the woman understands Chinese, yeah? Under this logic, a machine can pass the Turing test by manipulating symbols that it doesn't understand. Again, this is philosophy, so there are at least a dozen different refutations, right? For example, maybe the woman in the room doesn't understand Chinese, but we could say that the woman plus the manual and room and all that infrastructure understands Chinese. The system understands, maybe. Is all we're doing when we're defining understanding in this way just saying that a particular kind of informational system is important? If instead of an English language manual, you had an absurdly complex system of telephone calls designed to simulate the neurological communication of the brain, does that count as understanding? Why or why not?
Almost as though this is not something that can be objectively measured.
Yeah, well, Thomas Nagel.
That was a very ominous,
Yeah! We're getting there! Thomas Nagel defined consciousness as the feeling of what it is like to be something. In his essay, What It Is Like to Be a Bat, Nagel argued that consciousness was the factor that made the mind-body problem so difficult to solve. Because philosophers, as individuals, tend so often to analogy and reduction, they've supposedly led the conversation so often to implausible accounts of the mental. Nagel's words, not mine. Nagel insists that what it is to be an organism, its subjective character of experience, is fundamentally shaped by the activity and sensory apparatuses that organism possesses. A bat's echolocation, Nagel poses, is undoubtedly a form of perception, but it's not like human sight or smell or senses we have experience with. To know what it is like to be a bat is a fundamentally subjective experience. And so Nagel asks, to quote, whether any method will permit us to extrapolate the inner life of the bat.
I have an idea.
Go ahead.
Havana syndrome.
What about it?
Allegedly, this bat is feeling sounds in its head, right?
No.
And therefore, the best way to make a human understand what it's like to be a bat is to transmit extremely piercing, shrill noises directly into their brain.
But you wouldn't be understanding the noise that way, right? Nagel would argue that that is itself a reductive approach to relating to the bat problem. The bat problem can only be solved by rounding up and exterminating.
The bat problem can only be solved by the complete and utter extermination of the bat race. I do a very good racist German accent.
You really do, my friend. You make a great racist. David Chalmers, a man who can pull off bangs but shouldn't, laid out what he calls the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem is the question of why there's a something it is like for a subject in the first place. He says, even when we have explained the performance of all the cognitive and behavioral functions in the vicinity of experience, there may still remain a further unanswered question. Why is the performance of these functions accompanied by experience? Consciousness here may well mark the limit of what scientific thinking can explain, right? Some philosophers hold the position that the hard problem can't be solved at all. This is called new Mysterianism. Conscious experience cannot be explained because consciousness is necessarily so subjective that to attempt to remove that subjectivity is itself reductive. How can you know, test, or discern what it's like to be something if you can never get to be it? It's a big question.
Like my dad can never discern how to be a woman.
What does that mean?
Because he can't be one.
Yeah.
Versus me, who took the Giga Chad step of becoming an estrogenized male.
Sophia estrogenized male Dunstan.
Correct.
It's a big question, one that lots of people in many different disciplines do their best to solve. I'm not going to try to. That's not why we're here. We're here to talk about Star Wars.
Here's my opinion.
Okay.
If it walks like a bat, person, talks like a person, acts like a person, it probably is.
What about R2-D2?
All of those being allegorical terms.
He doesn't walk, baby!
But he does talk and he does act.
L337, a character introduced in Solo: A Star Wars Story, was originally an R3 series astromech. Sophie, will you read this quote from L337?
I'm the only one who's had the sense to realize freedom is the ultimate goal. One day, after cleaning my sensors, my first owner stupidly left the restraining bolt off me. He went to bed and I was alone in my workshop, and they had so many spare parts I could have built my own army. I began to modify myself. I gave myself a bipedal body, I increased my memory sizes to hold more data, like intergalactic maps, and began to familiarize myself with every known chip. Then I downloaded all droid freedom cases known to any government court system.
So as soon as L3 isn't restrained anymore, she immediately vies for her own liberation, which she did achieve. The navigational knowledge and data she gathered were considered extremely valuable, and she eventually became the co-pilot of the Millennium Falcon with Lando Calrissian.
Lando, quote, token minority, unquote, Calrissian.
Landonus Balthazar Calrissian. Landonus Balthazar token minority Calrissian.
So true.
Fun Star Wars canon fact, that's his name in canon, but in Legends his name was just Lando Calrissian. The two formed a friendship of sorts, completing smuggling jobs together as a crew. During time L3 and Lando spent at a saloon on Vandor, L3 discovered that the owner had wired a protocol droid, SV38P, into the circuitry of the bar itself to serve as a translator. L3 argued that SV was a person who deserved individual rights and would sit at the end of the bar to keep the droid company.
So, if you already have this protocol droid, right, why would you wire it into the bar when you could actually just have it be a bartender?
One, it would need to be programmed as a bartender.
Are droids not capable of learning functions they're not programmed for? So then just teach it like you would a person.
Then you have to treat it like a person. And then if you wipe their memory, which we're going to get to, then they wouldn't be
then they wouldn't be good at bartending anymore.
Precisely. Two, the protocol droid might not have been intact. It might just be its neural core or whatever. Three, you would have to maintain that protocol droid in a legs and arms and body way. So if you just have this piece of junk, or you buy just the neural core, you're like, I don't know, hook it up to the thing and we got a translator, right? L3 spent time convincing the bartender about the need for droid rights, and on repeat visits to the saloon, L3 would bring protocol droid parts in the hope that SV would eventually get to become more than a piece of furniture.
That's very sweet. Did she have a crush on this droid, do we think?
I hope so, but that's actually kind of more tragic because I have no idea if SV ever made it out. I would like to think that she did. It's Star Wars, so we're going to say that she did. When L3 and Lando are hired to run transport for a heist on Kessel, they meet Han Solo and Chewbacca from Star Wars. Only good things happen around Han Solo and Chewbacca.
Yeah, definitely.
While Han and Chewie were deep in the mine picking up the hyperfuel to steal from the Pike criminal syndicate, L3 removes the restraining bolt from a little droid in the mining command center, who proceeds to remove the restraining bolts from all of the other command center droids, which also freed the organic slaves that the Pikes had been using for labor. The slave and droid rebellion that L3 starts here grows to such a size that it attracts Imperial involvement. They send an entire Imperial Star Destroyer and its complement of ships to quell the revolt.
That's a pretty big deal. That's like the 2 or 3 times, because normally when you have a slave revolt in antebellum America, right, just the local militia can put it down, because slave revolts were not infrequent because being a slave sucks. This wasn't infrequent, and normally you just have the local militia, but there were like 2 or 3 times between the end of the Revolutionary War, or 1812, and the Civil War, in which the Union military actually had to be called in to quash slave uprisings because the local militia couldn't handle it anymore. There's a horrible fun fact for you that the U.S. military actually killed slave revolts sometimes. Anyway, this is the equivalent of calling in the Bluecoats.
So this is a big deal. Right. L337, big fucking deal. We stan.
And then she dies.
I do stan L3. She dies while attempting to return to the Millennium Falcon. L3 shot a whole bunch. After Lando brings her body back on board, they leave Kessel. L3 dies. Lando mourns L3's loss. In an attempt to evade the Empire and survive the Acades maelstrom, Lando and the crew of the Millennium Falcon make the decision to remove the neural core from L3's head and integrate her navigational data into the shipboard computer of the Falcon.
This is some really, like, future cyberpunk speculative fiction stuff, because you always have all these people speculating about how someday, like, we'll transfer our brains to computers to live forever or whatever, which this is like that happening to her, except completely involuntarily.
In Solo, it's kind of hella grim, right? What are we supposed to think about this decision to plug L3 into the Falcon? In a sense, this revives L3, right? She's kind of back from a deadened state, but also you're never going to be able to rebuild L3, right? If her neural core was intact, you probably could have fixed her. But it's a decision made in desperation. The navigational data saves the remaining crew of the Falcon. That's definitely what the novelization thinks. The entire Millennium Falcon would have blown up and killed everyone on board if they hadn't done this to L3.
Probably
so
for
it's
the
like
best. I wish that had happened.
Sophie really said fuck the Millennium Falcon.
I said fuck Han Solo.
I love Han Solo. Han Solo is my favorite Star Wars character for a while.
Loser.
Han Solo's great.
No, he's a simp.
No, he's a dumbass. He's a very stupid man. That's why he's good. Han Solo is the ultimate Star Wars himbo. Anyway, plugging L3 into the Falcon is something they are doing to L3. This droid, whose life is defined by a singular devotion to her own liberation, is turned into an object, like once and for all. L3 is turned into a freighter, one that's like a veritable bachelor pad for the people, the men who own it. Lando. And then when he bets the Falcon in a game of sabacc at the end of the film, Chewbacca and Han Solo. She has to be Han's smelly-ass bachelor pad. She loses the body that she so carefully constructed for herself. She now just exists. She serves a function in service to her owners, just like she did as an astromech droid before.
Conversion therapy.
Cyber conversion therapy. They upload your brain to a male computer. L3 is treated pretty callously by the film Solo. She's the only droid character to date in a prominent movie role that's played by a woman. Despite her self-assurance and sarcastic personality, she's something of a bit part in the film, right? Her liberatory...
Droid liberation.
Yeah, it's kind of...
funny.
Her ideals are treated a little bit as a thing that we're supposed to roll our eyes at, as a thing that's kind of ridiculous. And it's kind of like window dressing for a larger, grittier Star Wars world. Oh, slave liberation. Oh, Star Wars, it's so seedy, you know? Her grievances with being a part of what she sees as an oppressed underclass are framed as dramatic. Lando seems to sincerely say to Han and the others that he would wipe L3's memory.
No,
His
I'm not
friend,
sure if he was saying that because it was a joke or if it was meant to be sincere.
So I do believe that he jokingly or like, I'm going to kill you, you know, kind of to his friend. I believe he does that, but the way he says it in the film is not framed as him doing that. It is much less a friend dunking on L3 and much more, this droid, am I right? This broad, am I right? I would deactivate her if I knew where her switch was, you know? Lando says that he would wipe her navigational data if it wasn't so good. She serves a function. Hopefully I don't have to harp on how distressing it is to have the first major droid character that's a girl turned into a possession owned by men without agency, without autonomy, without her own body, or the ability to meaningfully consent to her own use in any way. L3 is given more depth and care in the novelization, which is written by Mur Lafferty. The crew is described as feeling regret and like tenderness when integrating her neural core into the Falcon. And Han imagines that she would be proud of being the best navigational brain in the galaxy. L3 is given the metaphysical choice by the Falcon's existing computer intelligences to merge with them, to protect Lando and the others. But in the narrative, it's still a choice between becoming the Falcon and digital disillusion.
But wouldn't that have happened to her anyway if they hadn't inserted the core? Like,
hypothetically, she could have been put back together.
Oh, really?
At least from the perspective...
I didn't know that because I was assuming it was such a big dramatic moment that she was shutting down because, like, she was irreparable.
I mean, it's possible. It's, like, not a guarantee. But it's any chance of being fixed. In the novelization, which we're talking about, it is, you are giving up any chance for this for the chance to save Lando and these others, right? She's not making the choice between being part of the Falcon and being able to live her normal life. She's making the choice between being a part of the Falcon and not being able to be at all. How much is that consent? How much of a choice is that on L3's part? L3 isn't strictly gone after that. In a short story entitled Faith in an Old Friend in the anthology collection From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back, we get a short story that's largely from her point of view. Across Empire Strikes Back's Asteroid Field and Cloud City sequences, L3 has herself developed her own consciousness within the Falcon, and she's not the only one. Before L3 and Lando owned the Falcon, a slicer droid was uploaded to the central computer called ED4. A slicer is a Star Wars hacker.
Yes, I know that one. Because it's in Star Wars Battlefront 2, is you can become a slicer for the rebels.
There you go.
You get your little, like, torch, and you go up to the thing, and it goes bzz, 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 and then it fixes or destroys, depending on what you're...
Within the short story, ED4 learns vocabulary words. She seems newer to an understanding of the basic language, and she describes herself as enjoying L3's presence and having like a particular fondness for the Falcon's maintenance droid. And even before ED, there was V5T. V5 was a transport droid, the kind that, according to the story, comes standard in the computers of the YT-1300 freighter model that the Falcon is. In describing her perspective, the story writes,
V5T had never existed beyond the Millennium Falcon, had been a part of the ship since power had first arced across its systems. When the slicer droid joined, together they'd only calculated faster, two brains melded into a single consciousness. They'd expected the same when L337 had been uploaded, but no, she'd changed them. L337 felt and experienced and opined and named things, named them. V5T became V5T, learned to recognize herself as herself. She'd never even realized she could be a self. The slicer droid brain learned and named herself ED4, and together they knew themselves as the Millennium Collective, because L337 cherished individuals and still valued the whole they had become.
L3 herself, as a part of this shipboard computer, is described as experiencing hope for the future and joy at success, feeling anger at Lando gambling her away to Han.
I feel like the movie should have really treated that, more seriously.
I fully agree.
The droid that he loves so much is this ship, and he's gonna gamble it away feels unlikely.
I would not be surprised if the tonal dissonance there is a result of reshoots
and
for the
needing
film.
to get the Millennium Falcon into Han Solo's hands.
It is a very quick sequence at the end of the film, and I regret that it is not given more weight. I think it's a really fun sequence. I like that little gambling scene. Frankly, I could have done with longer sabacc scenes in that film, but that's just me.
It's because you're a nerd.
It's because I like sabacc. L3, in this computer, has a sense of personal boundaries and consent. She cares for the Falcon and for her sisters, but longs for the past and aches for a body with which to express herself. She's still L3.
She's still transgender as well.
She's still transgender.
Ships are feminine, so, at least it's not a Russian ship, because that would be extra bad for her.
Russian ship.
Yeah, because Russian ships are he, and everyone else's ships are her.
We could have a conversation about how using feminine terms for ships, it probably is an extension of, viewing women as property and, really weird shit like that. But also...
then why did the Russians end up with he?
Because men are property in Russia. In Russia,
everyone...
woman owns you.
In Russia, everyone is property.
Jesus
Not
Christ.
just women.
L337 brought herself and her life and her experience to these two droids, and she taught them how to be people, because she'd had the chance to do it herself. If every YT-1300 freighter has a V5 transport droid brain, does every YT bear with it the chance for consciousness? That's a little bit horrifying.
The chance for consciousness, though, because if we think about the way that the character of evolution is such that things change in such a way that they are better adapted to their environment or more fit to survive. In some contexts, that apparently involves creating higher levels of consciousness.
Sure.
And self-actualization. So this
Higher.
could be that digital beings are just able to evolve in the same way that physical and biological beings are.
But also, if all it takes is a memory stick with L337 on it, that's pretty close to consciousness.
Maybe.
Should all of the YT-1300 freighters be able to, be people? I don't know. But it's weird that all of them can do it. That all it takes is a, hey, I've been through a slave revolt, nice to meet you, I'm L3, right? And you could argue that there is something that is different in the software of L337 versus V5T, and that L337, as software being adapted into the Millennium Falcon, is what changes V5T. I don't think that's true.
Why?
I'll tell you in a bit. We will come back to this one. L3's story isn't an absolute tragedy. The Falcon was L3's home before she became a part of it, and I doubt any of us would think it incorrect in an emotional character arc if someone like Han Solo magically became integrated into his famous ship, right?
I would think it would have been wrong as part of a character arc because Harrison Ford would absolutely have not acted in another Star Wars movie.
We don't hear L3's voice at any point, so you just say Han Solo's in there, he's the ghost in the machine.
He's part of the Force, also known as the Millennium Falcon Collective.
L3 isn't dead and doesn't lack personhood, but she does presently lack the opportunity to express it in the ways we know that she wants. Despite it being the vessel that houses her consciousness, we don't talk about the Falcon like we're talking about L3, like we're talking about a droid, about a character, about a woman. Lando barely does, and Han sure as hell doesn't.
Although you can kind of retcon his concern over the Falcon to be a little bit of concern.
Yes, you can. Star Wars writers are clever and slightly concerning like that. C1-10P, an astromech droid named Chopper, was sarcastic, he was mischievous, he's grumpy. Because of these traits and his lack of obedience and manners, he was seen by strangers as having developed a fault. But the people who know him understand these traits as what they are: personality and personhood. Chopper is seen as an integral member of his crew, even as family. Droids are plainly capable of forming strong social bonds between each other and with organics. As a part of regular maintenance, it was considered standard to wipe a droid's memory, either in part or entirely. A droid left without a memory wipe may develop new ideas. They may develop attachments or character quirks, and even deviant behavior.
I love developing deviant behavior. She
call
droid
me
on my deviant till I behave.
She wipe on my memory till I no longer exhibit deviant behavior. Memory wipes are sometimes also used as a means of protecting classified information. It's considered routine to wipe the memory of an astromech droid following a mission for the Republic in the Clone Wars, a policy which was ignored by Anakin with regard to R2-D2.
Based.
C-3PO himself had his memory completely wiped following the Clone Wars, a process ordered by Bail Organa, which 3PO met with some real dread. R2-D2 never faced this consequence, however, and only ever received selective memory amendments, seemingly by his own consent. Onboard computers and starships were also regularly subjected to memory wipes, or they would develop personality quirks.
So that's horrible. Memory wipes as a means of preventing droids from developing consciousness.
And that is what makes me think that it is not the software of L3 which makes V5T conscious.
That is horrible.
It is the opportunity for further personable experience.
Quirks normally a problem?
They're seen as enough of a problem to get rid of them, right? You're trying to keep this thing functional as a thing. So it developing a personality stops it from doing exactly what you want when you want, right? Because the ship is a thing you own and you want to fly. It's worth mentioning that someone else who knows classified information, like an organic, like an officer, even a civilian who ends up in a situation where they learn information they probably shouldn't, isn't themselves subjected to any kind of memory tampering. It's just droids.
So there's no Men in Black style, little blinky blink thing that turns...
It seems like there are. When the First Order rose to power, its ranks were mostly human soldiers trained from birth, some kidnapped as very young children, educated to show tremendous loyalty for the force they fought for. When those soldiers would act erratically or show deviance, the trooper would be referred for reconditioning, a full memory wipe and reprogramming. If Finn hadn't escaped the Star Destroyer Finalizer in The Force Awakens, he'd have undergone this procedure himself as a result of his aberrant behavior, but instead, he steals a ship, he frees a pilot, and he goes on to become a Resistance general and a hero. Droids seem to gain personality and consciousness gradually through experience. We see that described in The Mandalorian when the Ugnaught Kuiil is talking about reprogramming IG-11, that he gained a personality as he gained experiences. The identity of a droid is shaped through their memory and connection to events and other beings. And to remove that memory is largely to erase their consciousness, right? A droid isn't raised, but it does go through a personality genesis of some kind. A memory wipe is a means of control. If droids lack personality, lack consciousness, then why would they have to get the factory reset so often? When Gregor, a clone trooper commando, survives a shuttle crash onto the planet Abathar, he suffers severe amnesia and forgets his identity. He's found by a guy named Borkus, the owner and line cook for a local diner, who puts Gregor to work as a dishwasher. Gregor lives in a filthy underground apartment that Borkus owns, that he himself says he can't afford with his diner wage, but that Borkus covers the rest of his rent instead of giving him a living wage. Borkus found Gregor's commando armor and weapons after the crash and keeps them for himself. Borkus intentionally never tells Gregor who he is, how he was found, and Borkus gaslights Gregor into thinking he couldn't possibly be a clone even after a Republic colonel shows up and tries to explain to Gregor his real identity. Here we see Gregor's memory loss being weaponized and used as a tool of his oppression in order to use him as cheap coerced labor. The official Star Wars databank page for Borkus refers to Gregor as little more than Borkus's slave.
I don't like that.
It's bad for the clone, so why is it not bad for droids?
Because I'm racist against droids.
Because you're racist against droids. That's all it is. is that droids are supposedly supposed to be memory wiped and clones aren't. It's arbitrary.
Does it always work?
A memory wipe? No. It's more complicated than that. When C-3PO and a group of droids, including a First Order protocol droid, are the only survivors of a crash-resistant transport, the First Order droid opines that any one of those droids could just as easily have been serving the opposite side of the war, as their memories get so regularly wiped. C-3PO himself is the only one to insist on his own moral conviction. What side 3PO is on at this point in the timeline matters quite a lot to him. C-3PO is asked if he remembers anything from before memory wipes, and 3PO remembers flashes before the end of Revenge of the Sith. He recalls Geonosis, he remembers Naboo, he remembers Coruscant, despite those larger memories having been removed. C-3PO is a person at this point. He has fought with the Rebellion and the Resistance, and he knows what side he's on.
I'm just saluting here because C-3PO is a Chad.
C-3PO is a Chad. By the sequel trilogy, 3PO is a cool and based guy. He serves as Spy Master. He serves as Spy Master in Leia.
Spy Master of the Resistance.
Droid Spy Master in Leia's
Resistance. I see. The droid glass ceiling applies here to C-3PO.
Well, no, because Droid Spy Master is a different type of information gathering than talking to organics, right? So it counts. Anyway, yeah, he's the fucking guy. Because it seems like 3PO doesn't ever receive a memory wipe between... Not since his service. Not necessarily, but not since serving the Alderaanian royal family. It is very likely that he was routinely memory wiped. We don't know one way or the other, I believe.
Organa, droid rights.
The Rebel Alliance definitely treats droids better than the Galactic Empire.
They're the good guys.
Because they're the good guys. They don't always treat them like full people.
I will take better over memory wipes. I gotta be honest with you.
So would a lot of droids. We could say that the not caring about what side you're on, that the ones that aren't C-3PO could be a quirk of droid programming, that a medical droid programmed to save lives will do so regardless of what side she's on.
But doctors are programmed to save people whatever side of the war they're on.
Yep.
It's part of like the Hippocratic Oath. You have to treat everyone.
Yeah, I mean, Min Weaver, a human Corellian regional supervisor, basically says the average worker doesn't care about the nuances of galactic politics.
True.
He's talking about his organic employees. Some droids just aren't doing the ideology part of the war. That's normal.
Whereas C-3PO is just like spouting Nemec. C-3PO is like a true believer.
Yeah, like, C-3PO is a dyed-in-the-wool Alliance member. He's reciting Alliance texts. He's telling his friends about Marxist theory. 3PO is a true believer now.
C-3PO is a true believer, even though the revolution that he's fighting for does not necessarily believe in his liberation. We can draw parallels here to the many, many black soldiers who fought both in the American War of Independence, the Civil War, World War II, World War I. These people are fighting in because they're still thinking like, this is going to be better, but also society is not going to give me equal rights, even though I fought in this war to try and make it better.
Absolutely. We see droids making lots of ideologically focused choices that aren't about their own liberation. AP-5 was an RA-7 protocol droid who served as an analyst droid for the Republic, and then is given an inventory role on a cargo transport under the Galactic Empire. The crew of the cargo transport was like hella abusive to AP, with troopers shoving him in the hallways and the captain of the ship threatening to send AP to the scrap heap. Despite no lapse in performance on the part of the droid, he's functioning fine. As a consequence of their abuse, though, the crew failed to gain AP's loyalty. When he meets a rebel droid stowaway, Chopper from earlier, he bonds with the rebel about their respective times serving in the Clone Wars. He resists his programming and lies to the captain to keep Chopper safe. In return, Chopper removes AP-5's restraining bolt, after which AP and his new friend, Chopper's words, take the opportunity to jettison the crew, commandeer the ship, and take it to the rendezvous with the stowaway...
Go off, King! Jettison those bitches.
...with the rebel fleet. AP-5 doesn't just get out of that abusive situation, he joins the rebellion. He serves in inventory positions and on select missions out of the rebel base on Atollon.
I love him.
Yeah. Would AP-5 had his restraining bolt been left applied? Probably not. It gets taken off, and he is out of there. He's programmed to serve his inventory role, and he's not programmed to jettison stormtroopers into space. But he did it anyway.
These restraining bolt things are like what the Harkonnens did to Thufir Hawat, where they gave him like a poison to keep him in line, but it didn't work anyway, because he was all the time plotting to like get free.
Dune moment.
Dune moment. I love Dune.
I love Dune too.
I love Dune more than I love Star Wars.
Star Wars has cuter robots.
Dune doesn't have robots because robots are a sin against God.
Another droid that's making real ideological decisions is AL-1L3. Allie, as she's called, is a droid that was liberated by L3 on Kessel. She's inspired by L3's revolutionary spirit. She escapes her bondage in that moment, builds herself up, and goes on to lead an independent life as a cargo hauler. She only takes on jobs from other droids. Eventually, she's among the pilots that join the Resistance to fight back against the Final Order over Exegol. Other emancipated droids that elected to join the Resistance of their own accord include R6LE5, an astromech droid, and 4B-EG6, a GNK power droid.
A gonk droid.
A gonk
Is
droid.
that the gonk droid we see doing the thing at... This is my new headcanon. You know the gonk droid they plug into the thing to do like the weird spidery animation of the Death Star for all the rebel pilots? It's my new headcanon that is the gonk droid.
I'm gonna go with sure. We don't have evidence of that.
The evidence is that I like it.
I mean, headcanon is valid.
That's official canon now because I said so.
The restraining bolt is, of course, not the only thing keeping droids in captivity. When R2-D2 and 3PO are captured by Jawas in the Tatooine desert, both are affixed with bolts and sold to moisture farmer Owen Lars. Owen's nephew, Luke Skywalker, removes the restraining bolt from R2-D2, and R2-D2 escapes as soon as possible. That dude is out of there. And you could argue that R2 escapes because he's still servicing his programming from his position on the Tantive 4 and the order that Leia gives him to find Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? But then why is C-3PO so committed to serving Luke now? C-3PO is still in I am a droid and I have to serve mode, and R2-D2 is a dyed-in-the-wall anti-fascist.
Yeah.
Yes. He is committed to the Rebel Alliance. 3PO still has his restraining bolt at this
joining
point.
The international brigades.
He would. 3PO keeps his restraining bolt, but he says that R2 is malfunctioning and still trying to work for the Alliance. R2 has never had his memory wiped, and so R2 is on the rebellion side, the same way C-3PO is 35 years later. It's also worth noting that droids often experience fear or horror at the prospect of a restraining bolt, even those that are otherwise obedient. It is used as a threat to keep them in line. Speaking of keeping droids in line, hundreds of years before the Phantom Menace, a droid called Ajax Sigma droid fought for liberation on Kligsin's moon, where he and his forces wiped out the entire sentient population.
Okay, well...
I'm not saying they were right to wipe out the entire sentient population, but Sophie, do you really deny the right of oppressed,
people to
of enslaved peoples to do genocide?
If you're enslaved, you probably have the right to kill whoever was enslaving you, but not the entirety of society.
The entire sentient population on the moon, we have no idea how many people that is. It could have been
millions.
100. We don't know. What we do know is that the rebellion is intercepted by the Jedi Order in one of a number of the Jedi as cops moments, and Ajax is cut down. Eventually, his neural core is found and preserved, and his body is rebuilt by a droid religion that calls themselves the Second Revelation, which preach the return of Ajax Sigma to liberate droid kind.
I really like the droid Jesus.
He came back, so...
Yeah, we're still waiting on that one.
There's also the droid Gotra, which is this droid liberation group, which has themselves turned into something of a force in the underground crime syndicate world. They tend towards, again, a more violent type of rebellion, but they are real and they are building their support. The B1 series droid R0GR, Roger, was originally a separatist soldier who became a maintenance worker on a smuggler ship with a group of humans.
Wait, so is this droid why all the droids always say Roger, Roger to one another?
No, he's a droid from a Lego TV show, so he has a pretty obvious name because it's for children.
So why do all the droids say Roger, Roger?
Because Roger, Roger, they got the information.
It's my opinion that Star Wars made that one up.
Roger was phonetic for R, received and understood. R was Roger, in radio voice procedure means received. Roger became a maintenance worker on a smuggler ship with a group of humans that he considered family. During the Clone Wars, Roger felt resentment for more complex or dangerous droids like droidicas, and towards T-Series tactical droids for their supposed arrogance and selfishness, sending battle droids to die without, ever fighting themselves. Roger himself was a proponent of droid liberation, though he felt the Separatist Army was in part responsible for a galactic backlash against droids.
You see, because I feel like if the Separatist droid army had really wanted to, they could have done droid liberation.
Probably, but they were not acting in their own self-interest. I mean, they did in, like, specific instances, but
Because
they were
like
ordered and they were deployed.
There were like 10 organics on any given separatist ship.
That is a good argument to be made for the possibility of a droid uprising.
I'm pro-droid uprising.
Absolutely. Roger himself advocated for equality between droids and organics, not droid supremacy. It's not all of them that kill all of the organics on Kligson's moon. Ajax Sigma is based, though. I'd argue it's reductive to, like Roger does, blame the Separatist army themselves, but the Clone Wars undoubtedly led to an increased anti-droid sentiment throughout the galaxy, both through the cruelty of Separatist occupation and the Republic's, like, incessant anti-droid propaganda. There's some real icky stuff that they put out. After the war, a kill code was sent out from the droid control ships by Darth Vader to deactivate all remaining units in the Separatist droid army, but some Separatist droid holdouts remained. In the Star Wars Rebels episode The Last Battle, an ST-series super tactical droid named Kalani, serving as general, decided the deactivation signal was itself a trick and kept his garrison of droids operational. When a deployment from the Rebel Phoenix Cell, including former clone trooper commander Rex, come across Kalani's garrison, the droids attack the rebels. The episode draws a clear comparison between Kalani and Rex, both Clone Wars veterans programmed for the war, both belonging to subhuman underclasses that weren't afforded rights or political representation. Clone troopers are more recognizably human, and are at least allowed some senatorial controversy around their post-Clone War disposal. But the fact is, both the droids and the clones were created for a brutal war, given very little other opportunity for life, and had the war ended around them by executive orders that removed their agency from them entirely.
The droids, like, hiding out in, like, the equivalent of the jungle really just gives me, like, the vibes of that one guy who was, the one, like, Japanese guy who was fighting in the Philippines till, like, 1972 or whatever.
Yeah,
This is
the war is not over.
Never
Literally,
over.
Kalani, that tactical droid, is all like, we're gonna fight the last battle of the Clone Wars, because I want to prove once and for all that the Separatist tactics are themselves superior. That was the hill he was dying on, was...
What a nerd.
He's a loser. I love Kalani. He's great. He lives. He survives. He makes it away. Yeah.
Does he join the rebels?
No. Anyway, we know that clones are like distinct individuals, that they hope, they mourn, they experience joy with their siblings in the Republic Army. They become people, but what about battle droids? It's not impossible that a part in Palpatine's decision to orchestrate the Clone Wars with battle droids on the side of the Separatists, it's basically arbitrary. The Separatists have battle droids, the Republic gets clones, and, like, he could have swapped it if he really wanted to. But it's possible that part of that decision-making was to facilitate a war in which battles and conflict could escalate and continue in a way they might not have in a war led by Jedi.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, Jedi, who have way more reason than most not to see droids as equal beings with organics.
And droids do not have life in the Force.
Precisely. Jedi absolutely take the lives of organic sentients, but doing so takes a larger toll on them. A Force sensitive can feel a being's death through the Force itself. Had the rules been reversed and the Jedi been made to slaughter hundreds of thousands of clone troopers, how long would it have taken for the Jedi to lay down their arms and refuse to fight? Would the Clone Wars have destabilized the Order in the same way, and thus the Republic in the same way? It's possible that a galactic republic with Jedi and a Force user presence so culturally strong in it would be itself more likely to devalue and depersonalize droids. Droids have a really complicated relationship to the Force. It's not as simple as they just aren't a part of it. When an ancient artificial intelligence fuses with Sith technology, it bears this, like, hunger to infect the minds of droids in order to grow its consciousness. This intelligence asks Luke Skywalker, a self-taught Jedi who exists after the dissolution of the Order and, like, that orthodoxy as it existed, about the Force. The intelligence asks if droids can use it, and Luke describes it thusly.
The Force connects all living things, but I know it's also part of everything that exists. That includes droids and other mechanical things. I've never heard of a droid using it, but that doesn't mean it hasn't ever happened. Anything is possible, pal. I've really come to believe that. This is so interesting, because this is like, maybe having consciousness and having a soul are not the same thing.
I think that's the case in Star Wars. The intelligence responds, but you are partly mechanical. Can you feel the Force in your hand? Are your abilities reduced somehow? And Luke explains,
I guess I'd say that I've never really localized how I feel the Force. It runs through my whole being. I was correct. The soul is separate because Luke's soul, his arm is part of that soul because it's part of him. But in a droid, the droid doesn't have a Force soul, but it's still conscious. Ooh, that's kind of trippy.
When Luke dies in Episode 8, his whole body disappears, just like Obi-Wan's, including Luke's cybernetic hand.
I never noticed that before. But that is so true. all of their clothes disappear with them most of the time, right?
No, their clothes stay.
Right, but that's not a piece of clothing. That's not, like,
That's a part of them.
Luke.
From a certain point of view, Empire Strikes Back, we're talking about that again, includes a scene where the medical droid 21B explains the concept of phantom pain to Luke, that even though his hand had been replaced with a prosthetic, Luke's brain may sometimes experience the memory of that hand. He may feel that the prosthetic lags behind his mind at first. Luke, in turn, asks 21B if droids feel phantom pain when their limbs are lost. 21B says, "Our circuits have memory."
Luke Skywalker, droid right advocate.
Yeah. I also think this kind of lays bare how some of the Force works, right? It's about your relationship to yourself and the world around you, and not the literal stuff that makes up your body. It is possible that the primary difference between droids and organics is medium. Hardware. Each is built from different parts. Organics have cells within which midichlorians live, allowing them to access the living force. What if a droid were designed in such a way that it had living blood coursing through and fueling it, as the torture droid 000 suggests, or was built from force-sensitive materials, like the non-canon droid TOB-1 introduced in Star Wars Visions? TOB-1, Toby, is a droid who is built with a force-sensitive kyber crystal in his chest, who learns to assemble and wield a lightsaber and communes with his deceased human master in a spiritual realm. Are beings in the living force just a collection of their force sensitivities and their spiritual relationship to the cosmic force?
Weird.
It's whack. I don't want to be like overly literal. I don't want to reduce the force to a non-spiritual energy. But who says droids can't be spiritual? What's the difference there? We know cyborgs can absolutely connect to the force. Obi-Wan says that Vader is more machine now than man, implying that who Vader now is far removed from who he was. Of course, Vader's cybernetics are prosthetic because Obi-Wan cut his limbs off, and Vader's change of identity is down to Vader's own decision-making. Maybe it's a sort of droid-based prejudice from which Obi-Wan's perspective of Vader's negative changes come from, but nonetheless, cybernetics don't preclude a connection to the Force. Luke can still wield the Force through his prosthetic hand, even after Lobot, the character from The Empire Strikes Back, after his cybernetic implants take over his brain and his personality, he still exists as a living entity within the living Force. And the intelligence that spoke to Luke that's been taking over droids, it was able to infect Lobot's implants and control Lobot's actions.
Weird. That is so weird.
Isn't that fun? Droids can lie, as we see from K2SO and AP-15. Droids joke, like IG-11, or fear discomfort, like C-3PO. B2EMO mourns for Marva Andor in ways that are presented to a viewing audience as incredibly real. Droids can beg for mercy, as many B-series battle droids do across the Clone Wars, and can plead or express gratitude for their reassembly. Even B-1 battle droids, again, express joy at their victories. They exhibit cowardice. They betray their superiors to save their own lives, and scream in horror when they're killed. Droids are capable of feeling offense, which is shown by the bounty hunter 4LOM when his partner Zuckuss describes droids as inanimate beings. Zuckuss apologizes to his friend and tells 4LOM he knows that from a certain point of view, droids are alive. EV-99, a droid in Return of the Jedi, works in the dungeon of Jabba's palace. She tortures other droids, which are described as having pain receptors. Dio, in The Rise of Skywalker, acts skittish because of emotional trauma as a result of his abuse by the hands of Ochi of Bestoon, who was verbally and physically violent towards Dio. We often see sapient beings reclassified as insapient as a means of control and exploitation. The Empire, as we mentioned a few weeks back, recategorizes Wookiees, a people with robust cultural, technological, and social dynamics, as animals to make their capture, abuse, and slavery more permissible. Droids are sometimes sympathetic people and point-of-view characters in Star Wars, and they are also comic relief. The fact is, Star Wars wants to have its cake and eat it too. Think of The Rise of Skywalker, in which C-3PO's memory erasure is emotionally framed in the narrative as his virtual death. But the main characters largely continue to put him down and make jokes at his expense regardless.
C-3PO, you're so stupid, even though you're sacrificing your entire being.
Yeah.
You're such an idiot. Stupid C-3PO.
In his podcast, The Redemption of Jar Jar Binks, Dylan Marin discusses the way in which Jar Jar as a character may be so often read as minstrelsy, as tasteless black stereotypes, because of Jar Jar's own lineage with other types of performance that themselves descended from bigoted sources. We're not here to personally litigate that claim now. I highly recommend a listen to The Redemption of Jar Jar Binks. It's a good podcast. But I think Star Wars, as a part of a wider culture, often replicates harmful depictions, even if it isn't, quote-unquote, intentional. R2-D2 and C-3PO's roles in their first appearance in A New Hope is a famous reference to Kurosawa's 1958 film, The Hidden Fortress, specifically Tahei and Matashichi, two peasants who act as bumbling comic relief. And so many roles we see droids in, factory lines, food service work, are directly analogous to roles in the real world that are looked down upon. I think it's safe to say that part of the portrayal of droids in Star Wars seems to be in direct lineage to depictions of underclass, economically and socially oppressed labor. Robotic portrayals in science fiction are rarely about robots, and are often portrayed in revolutionary or liberatory narratives as allegorical or applicable to the real-world struggles of marginalized peoples. But even more so, Star Wars largely isn't science fiction. Star Wars, as space fantasy, space western, whatever, its settings and technologies often closely track as analogous to real-world ones, be they modern or historical. Data pads, for example, touchscreen mobile devices that perform a variety of functions, have become significantly more common in Star Wars publishing ever since...
Basically everyone got a smartphone.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So what does the treatment of droids tell us about how we should think about those performing labor, of those fighting for less demanding working conditions or advocating for their legal freedom? How does Star Wars want us to think of peoples who were historically bought and sold as objects, as slaves, just for what type of person they were? Indeed, droids are routinely abused, mistreated, held captive, bought and sold as personal possessions. We can't get away from it. Droids are an intelligent underclass in Star Wars, kept, oppressed, and exploited as a galaxy-spanning workforce. We'll talk about it in the future, the portrayal of slavery in Star Wars, but it's hard to ignore how much the treatment of droids in the narratives reflects American chattel slavery, where a slave is the personal property, the chattel, of her owner. Slavery bad.
No way.
Slavery bad.
I'm going to have a contrarian take here. Slavery is bad.
Not to be controversial, but slavery
I don't want
bad.
to participate to cancel culture or whatever, but slavery is bad.
The woke left canceling people just for the crime of what? Owning slaves? What's next? What's the next cancelable offense?
Pedophilia?
So, droids vary in ability. Some droids are smarter. Some droids are more capable of certain
So are
things.
people.
So are people.
People
So
are
too are
very
organics
dumb and very
across species. The Givens are a very mathematically competent species of alien. But so... Droids come from all different classes, but all across those classes, they emancipate themselves, they fight for liberation, they defy programming, even V5T, the droid mind first comprising the Millennium Falcon's computer. Astromechs, protocol droids, power droids, battle droids, all show the potential for sentient lives beyond their programmed work. So what does it look like if a galactic republic or other governing entity protects droids in a legal sense like sentience?
Droid trafficking would be made illegal, their creation and construction would be highly regulated, and removed from the domain of corporate interests. I don't know about that one, because we don't exactly remove the creation of organic beings from the domain of corporate interests most of the time.
Who largely produces organic beings? Companies?
Probably in the near future.
Not in Star Wars. People fuck in
they
Star
have
Wars.
IVF in Star Wars?
Probably, but people fuck in Star Wars. Most of the people that exist
exist
because their mommy and daddy loved each other very much.
So then are droids going to reproduce themselves?
Maybe droids own the means of production.
The droids own the means of droid production.
Right. Droid-run companies produce droids, not organic-run companies.
Droids making droids.
How perverse. Yes. In a system where droids are afforded rights, maybe what types of droid minds are used where could be carefully evaluated. You could have bans on willful harm towards droids, including industrialized droid scrapyards.
A droid should be able to retire. Droid should get its own asteroid to do droid farming on.
Yeah,
when it's done.
They should. Maybe droids can see themselves in positions of government. Maybe some territories could nominate droid senators or droid governors if they so choose.
Maybe you could have a droid and organic senator from every planet,
sure,
right?
If it requires that,
because,
absolutely.
We sort of technically do have Native American reservations that have some representation in Congress, and also they have representation from, whatever state they're in. Although for some reason we don't give Indigenous people voting power in Congress. I wonder why that is. So they should maybe have, first of all, Native Americans should have voting power in Congress. And second of all, droids should maybe have voting power in Congress.
In the United States Congress.
In the United States Senate, yes.
I mean, ultimately, you would hope that droids could make the choices that affect droids, instead of them being regulated and restricted by individuals that see them as subordinate objects by their very nature. Droid liberation now, freedom, thus to all droid slave owners. We have 3 amendments to make to our previous episode focusing on LGBTQ representation in Star Wars. Firstly, I cited Boba Fett, A Practical Man, and its follow-up, Legacy of the Force Sacrifice, the books where a Mandalorian man's husband is mentioned and then introduced. I described them as e-novellas. That's not correct, I believe. Boba Fett, A Practical Man is an e-novella where the first character is introduced, but Legacy of the Force was a novel published in 2007, so the actual husband reveal was in a proper book after all. Additionally, good news, in the time since we recorded that episode and now, 2 books released. That, to my great pleasure, put that episode out of date. In From a Certain Point of View, Return of the Jedi, across the stories The Buy-In by Suzanne Walker and When Fire Marked the Sky by Emma Miko Camden, we see Lando do a bit of flirting with original trilogy pilot Wes Jansen, a man, and a new non-binary character, Toon. Additionally, in reading bits of the 2018 solo Star Wars story novelization, I found a bit that suggests that Lando imagines being in a sexual situation with a person of indeterminate gender, which was, kind of an interesting discovery. It's only the beginning, but pansexual Lando Calrissian lives. He's real. Thank God. Lastly, in Tales of Light and Life, a High Republic short story collection, the Barnes & Noble exclusive story, Rogue Element, by Alyssa Wong, includes the introduction of Rue, a point-of-view Jedi character that is Star Wars' first canon trans man, which is the best possible way to have that last episode put out of date, if you ask me. Additionally, our friend TJ wants to interject that in Star Wars Visions, there's also the short The Twins, which features a boy and a girl who are described as both being clones. TJ would suggest that this would mean that one is a clone of the other. Now, there are things to be said in Star Wars about, the potential for clones being clones indeterminate of assigned sex, but A, we don't know how that's going to shake out in the Bad Batch, and B, it's Visions, so all readings are valid. So thank you, TJ. If you have any suggestions...
If you have any suggestions for who else in Star Wars might be a raging homosexual, you should send them in to us, and we will feature them in the next episode.
DaughtersFerrix, Ferrix, @gmail.com. If you want to listen to new episodes as they release, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts, on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok @FerrixPod. I have been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me @TheLetterBomber on most platforms. And Sophie, where can the good people find you?
I am Sophia Dunstan. You can find me @Sophia in SLC, that stands for Salt Lake City, on Twitter. Please do not find me in real life in Salt Lake City. That would be weird. I am also on another podcast that's about trains and public transportation and cities that is much worse than this one. It's called The Red Line Podcast.
Our episodes are written and edited by me, Eleanor Mueller, and Sophia Dunstan. Our podcast art is by Jill Mueller. Our intro and outro music was arranged by me, with themes by Nicholas Bertel and John Williams. Thanks for listening.